Let's do an architecture speed run with Apollo Server on the back end, SvelteKit on the front end, and also URQL doing the requests, and GraphQL Code Generator building the TypeScript bindings. All right, I'm Jack Harrington, and this is Blue Collar Coder. Thank you for joining me, and let's get right into it. What we're going to do is we're going to build a CMS application. So here's the home page of that application. It's got 2 articles currently. It's got Hello World. You can click on that and jump into it. And you can also go over into articles, add a new article. So all of this is done using Svelte and also Tailwind on the front end. So let's jump over into the terminal and start building out our SvelteKit app. And that's going to give us our file structure that we can work off of. All right, I'm going to go into the temp directory. And then from there, I'm going to use npm init to build out our SvelteKit app. It's going to ask us what we want. So I'm going to use the skeleton project for this one. And I am going to use TypeScript. I'm going to use ESLint. I'm going to use Prettier and all that great stuff. All right, let's go bring that up in VS Code. All right, now for our UI, I'm going to use Tailwind for that. And in the description is a great article on Medium that gives you a walkthrough of how to do it. I'll bring that up right now so you can see it. It's basically a simple walkthrough of all the stuff that you need to add. So I'm just going to go and do that now. And we're going to start off with some dependencies. I'm going to bring in auto prefixer, post CSS, Tailwind, concurrently, cross-end, a bunch of cool stuff. Then I'm going to create a local post CSS config. I'm going to make a directory that's going to have our styles. I'm going to add a file for a Tailwind. And then I'm going to use Tailwind CSS init to build a Tailwind configuration file. Just pretty much standard stuff right out of the box. All right, so over in post CSS config, I'm going to bring in just some basic configurations for auto prefixer and Tailwind CSS. I'm not going to override anything. It's just going to be all the defaults. And then let's go over into the source and styles directory and take a look at Tailwind CSS. And in there, I'm just going to bring in the basic Tailwind stuff. Pretty simple. Now over in package.json, we need to add a few more scripts. And these replace some of the existing scripts, including dev and build. So in this case, we have an oldie script that's going to just do the SvelteKit stuff. We've got Tailwind stuff, and then concurrently brings these two together. So dev and build are run simultaneously using concurrently, and that's why we brought that in. And then the last thing we need to do is create a layout over in routes. So let's go and bring that in. All right, call that layout.svelte. And there we go. We're just going to import the Tailwind and then do a little bit of text magic here. Let's bring this up, make it look big. Okay. And now we can go and say yarn dev and see that our app, our SvelteKit app is all set up. Okay. Looks pretty good. So now we want to jump back and actually do the GraphQL side of the house to build a server that we're going to connect to that's going to have all of our articles and allow us to both query our articles and be able to add new articles. All right. So I'm going to create a new directory called server. And in that directory, I'm going to do yarn init y. And that's going to create a package.json for us. And then I'm going to add TypeScript and TS node in development mode. And then I'm going to init our TypeScript. It's going to create a TS config file for us. Let's take a look over here in the server and we can see it. Nice. All right, cool. Now I'm going to go and add the Apollo GraphQL stuff. That's going to be in the Apollo server and then also GraphQL. And finally, I'm going to make us an index.ts file, which is going to have our server in it. So into that file, I'm going to bring in Apollo server and GQL, and then I'm going to create the type defs. All right, so GitHub Copilot automatically put in a query for us, but I actually want to define what an article is. So I'm going to bring in a definition for our article, which is going to have a slug. That's basically the UID for the article. It's going to have a title, an author, and some content. And we want to go and get all the articles. So change that hello query to articles, and then say that it's going to return an array of articles. Of course, we need to have some articles to return. So let's go and bring those in. Here are just 2 placeholders, hello world. As you can see, that slug is just hello world, or any spaces are turned into dashes or something that looks nice on the URL. And now we need our resolvers. So I'm going to create an object called resolvers that has every resolver that we're going to need. So in this case, all we need is the resolver for query, which has articles on it. And it's just going to be a function that returns our articles. Next thing we need to do is create the server. So we've already brought in Apollo server up here, and this is going to actually combine these type defs and these resolvers. So let's paste that in there. So we create a new Apollo server, call it server, and give it the type defs and also the resolvers. So you're basically giving it the type definitions and then the stuff that's the functions that are going to go and get that data for you. And the last thing we need to do is just fire it up. We need to listen to a port. That's going to be by default 4000. So let's fire this up and see how this goes. So I'm going to mpx ts node index.ts and click on that. And that brings up our, well, sort of our Apollo server. This is the new studio system. Let's go and do a, well, yeah, that's actually a pretty good one. Query, example query. And I'll run that for you. And we get back our article slugs. And we can just add in if we want. We want the title as well. Great. Run that. Awesome. We can get whatever we want out of here. Again, this is one of the great thing about GraphQL is you can give it exactly what you want, and it gives you back the data exactly as you want it shaped, which is great. Okay, so now that we've got our GraphQL server running, we're going to bring in two things. We're going to bring in URQL, which is going to make the requests to that GraphQL API that's maintained by Formidable Labs. It's formidable stuff. And then we're also going to bring in the GraphQL Code Generator, which is going to build the TypeScript bindings for us automatically. So here is URQL, and here is that GraphQL Code Generator. And we'll start off with the code generator side of the house. So I'm going to go back over into our app. All right, so to start doing this, I'm going to go and create a new terminal. And the first thing I need to bring in is the GraphQL Code Gen command line interface, or CLI. That's going to have the basic core of our code generator. Then the next thing I need to do is bring in some base libraries. That includes introspection and named operations. So what's is actually going to be really cool. We're going to say that the code generator is going to point at our server. And then as we create our GraphQL queries on the client side, it's going to automatically go and check against the running server to make sure that the data that we ask for and the fields that we ask for are actually there. It's really cool. Next thing we need to do is bring in a bunch of plugins for TypeScript. I guess you can use GraphQL Code Generator to generate different languages. We're going to use TypeScript, so TypeScript is the one we want. GraphQL Code Generator is a very modular system, so that's why you have so many imports to back this up. It's all these little imports that bring in various different things. And then finally, we need to bring in the URQL stuff. So this is the generator specific to URQL, URQL. So this is going to include TypeScript URQL, URQL introspection, and then the operations store for Svelte. So that is actually getting down to the combination of URQL, which is platform agnostic, and Svelte, which is done via an operations store. All right, and the last thing we need to do is set up our client. So we need to bring in URQL Svelte. That's going to be our library that's going to go and access that GraphQL server. We're going to bring in URQL, which is the base library, which is platform agnostic, and then GraphQL, which is support for GraphQL. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is configure the code generator. So I'm going to go and create a new file called codegen.yaml. And let's go look at that file. It's going to be empty, and I'm going to bring in some basic configurations. I'm going to allow it to overwrite what's already there. The schema is located over on port 4000 on localhost. Obviously, if you're using this in production, you want to point it with your production server. And then what we're going to do is look at any file within the source directory that has star.graphql on it, and we're going to use that as the source that we're going to use to then generate the TypeScript bindings. So those are going to be our queries. So any file within source that has a .graphql extension is going to be used as a source for either a query or a mutation. And it's going to go and look at that, compare it against what's on the server, and then go build out the TypeScript types for us to make it all type safe. All right, then we need to add a little more configuration. And then finally, we need to tell it what to generate. So we create a generates key, and this is every file that we want it to generate. So we only want to create one, which is GraphQL.ts, and the plugins that we're going to use to build that are TypeScript, TypeScript operations, and then the URQL specific stuff with TypeScript URQL, and then the URQL Svelte operations store specific stuff. And you can basically just kind of stack these plugins up, and they just keep additively adding on to this GraphQL TS file. If you want to go, of course, make your own plugins that will use all of the data that's grabbed by the GraphQL Code Generator, of course, you can go do that and build whatever you want. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is actually go and generate stuff. So I'm going to go over here to package.json and bring in yet another script. which is called generate. And it's going to run that GraphQL Code Gen that we got from the GraphQL Code Gen CLI and give it that configuration of codegen.yaml. All right, let's try and run that, see what happens. Now it's going to blow up. And the reason that it's going to blow up is that it actually can't find anything with GraphQL in it. We don't have any queries yet. So, okay, let's go make one. So I'm going to go create a new directory in source called queries. And in there, we're going to create a new file called articles.graphql. Anything with that GraphQL extension is going to be parsed because of in our CodeGen YAML, we say that we're looking at source start.graphql. Cool. And now I'm going to run that generator again. And there we go. So now it's gone and created a new file called graphql.ts that has our article query in it. Let's go take a look at that. Article GraphQL is basically just the same query that we had before. We're just looking for articles. We're getting all that data. And it's going and reflecting against the server, figuring out what all those types are, and then automatically building out the generated file. So let's go take a look at that again. So there you go. So it's going to go and say that an article is optional. It may be a string. That's because in our schema, it's defined as optional. Now let's go and try something that actually doesn't work. So I'm going to bring in Pokemon here and see what happens. So Pokemon is not a field on our server. And I'm going to generate that and see what happens. Oh, okay, cool. So if I kind of dig through all this here, let's see, eventually we get our GraphQL document validation failed, cannot query field Pokemon on type article. So there you go. This is automatically checking to make sure that all of the fields that we're asking for in our queries exist on our server and doing it automatically for us. So cool. All right, so let's run it one more time just to make sure that everything's cool. Now we've taken out Pokemon from our articles GraphQL query. And let's start building out our homepage UI. So this is going to be the list of all of the articles. So I'm going to go over here to routes and then into layout and get rid of this hello people from Earth and pop in a nice little layout that has at the top a homepage link. And then this slot is going to be where our content goes. So, all right, so let's run this. I'm going to run yarn dev. And now we'll take a look at 3000, which is our server. And there we go. We got our homepage and we've got the welcome to Svelte kit. Be sure to read that. So let's go over here to Svelte. And that's why that says that this is the content for index. And then it sits within the layout that is defined inside of that layout file. So the next thing I need to do is create a client. So this is going to be the URQL client. So I'm going to go and create at the top level here, underscore client, and paste that in there. And that's going to import create client from URQL Svelte. And then we're just going to point it at 4000, which is our GraphQL server. All right, so let's go back over to our index.svelte route. And I'm going to say that this is going to be a pre-rendered page. So that's actually going to do the render on the server. Really cool. I'm going to say that the title of the page is articles. Let's go take a look and see if this is working. There you go. Header is now articles. That's great. And then I'm going to create a TypeScript language block. And then in there, I'm going to bring in setClient from URQL Svelte. And then I'm going to import that client and set that client. So now our client is set up, ready to talk to our server. And then I'm going to bring in our operations store from URQL Svelte. This is actually how you make the request. So you've got a query, and then the operations store is kind of where the data goes from that query. And then from that generated GraphQL file, we're going to bring in articles document and articles query. And these are the two things that were created by the code generator from that articles query. So we want to see the GraphQL. It's over here in articles document. We can go over to GraphQL, and then we can see that articles document has a copy of that query that we had in that GraphQL file. Easy peasy. So now to bring it all together, we just need to create the operations store with the articles query generic and give it the article document that has our request in it. And then I'm going to bring in some state stuff. So this is going to say, if we're fetching, then put up loading. If we had an error trying to get the data, then we'll put up an error message. And then in here, I'm just going to do JSON stringify. and then put in that data. Let's see what happens. Hey, there you go. That's really awesome. Okay, so this is actually all the data that we need to build out our UI. So let's go back over and actually build out our UI. And now what this is going to do is iterate through each one of those articles and call it article. And then it's going to create a div. This is all Tailwind stuff. Put up the article title, and it's going to have a link to the article. That's going to be on /articles, and then it's going to use that slug for the article URL. And then inside of that, you're going to have your title, and then finally content, and then author. Except for the fact that it's got some Tailwind stuff on it, this is actually just pretty simple stuff. Let's go take a look. Hey, nice. But if I click on one of these, obviously 404 because articles hello world is not found. So the next thing we need to do is actually allow us to go and have kind of a detail page. So as we're drilling down into it, we need to make a different type of GraphQL query that goes and gets an article by a given slug. So let's go and update our server to do that. So back over here in server and index.ts, we're going to add a new type of query, which is articles by slug. And we give it the slug that we want, and it gives us back the article. I love the word slug in this case. It's gross, but it's awesome. And of course, we need a resolver for that. So let's bring in a articles by slug. And what it's going to do is the context we don't care about, but we do care about the slug, which comes in as the second parameter. We coerce that to be a string in TypeScript land. And then we just go and do an articles find, which goes and looks to see if this article is found or not. Okay, so let's go and reboot the server. And then I'm going to take down the SvelteKit server, because the next thing I want to do is create a new query. I'm going to call this article by slug.graphql. I'm going to paste in our GraphQL query. And this is a simple query. It takes a single parameter, which is a slug, which has to be a string, thus the exclamation point on the end. It then passes that to that method, article by slug. And we want back from that the title, the content, and the author. We don't want the slug because we already have the slug, obviously. So let's save that out. And the next thing we want to do is yarn generate. All right, that's gone and built our generated TypeScript bindings for us. But again, if we wanted to go and add in Pokemon, just to make sure that this is actually going off and hitting the server. Oh, nope, something went wrong. So it is actually checking to make sure that article by slug exists and all those fields exist on it. And it takes that data. Really cool stuff. All right, so let's save that out. Generate again, looks good. And then let's start up the server again. All right, now over here in the routes, I'm going to create a new folder called articles, which maps to the URL. And then within that, I'm going to create a new file called brackets slug.svelte. And this is basically telling SvelteKit that anything you get like /articles/something, then that something should be assigned to a route parameter called slug, because that's our slug. So again, I'm going to start off with that pre-render. And then I'm going to bring in set client, but also page from the store. So page is going to tell us what that slug value is. Then I'm going to bring in our client and set it. Then I'm going to bring in all of our support for that article by slug query, including the operation, the store, and query, just like we had before. But also this time we're going to go get the article by slug document as opposed to the articles document. And then finally, we need to set up that store. So we're going to do an operation in the store, but we're going to give it that slug because it needs that variable. And where we get that from is $page params slug. Now, interesting, right? You've got page here, but you've got $page here. Well, this means that we're essentially subscribing to the page source here. That's actually a reactive value in Svelte. All right, let's put our title in there. And then I'm going to format the output. And again, we're going to say if we're fetching, we put that loading on there. If we have an error, then we put the error on there. And then otherwise, we're just going to get the data back. And we're going to get the article by slug data. You can make multiple requests in GraphQL on a single request. And by default, they're given the name of the query that you use. So in this case, it's article by slug. So we're going to get the title off that, and then the contents, and then finally the author. So let's go take a look and see how we did. Oh, okay, cool. So let's go back to home and then click on My New Book. Nice. Very cool. Awesome. All right. So the last thing we need to do to kind of really flesh out this example is have a mutation, right? We need to be able to actually mutate the data on the server. This is obviously not something you'd want to do, anybody be able to do really in the real world, but let's go and add a mutation to our server and then create a new route called /article/add that calls that mutation and adds a new article to our CMS system. So let's start off again on the server side of the house. I'll stop the server. And then I'm going to go over to our type defs and I'm going to add a mutation for add article. And add article is just going to take a title, an author, content, and it's going to create a new article for us. And it's going to do the little tweak on title to turn it into a slug for us. We don't have to pass the slug on. That's fine. All right, now we need to go and create a new resolver for that. So that's going to be under mutation. And then we're going to say add article. Again, context we don't care about. We're going to bring in the title, the author, and the content. We're just going to create a new article. We're going to do the slug where we go and do a little bit of a regex there to basically go and take any white space globally and then turn it into a dash. Pretty simple stuff. And then we add on the title, the author, and the content, and we push it, and then we fire off a new article as the one that we'll return back. It's pretty simple. We're not doing a lot of validation here. Of course, you'd want to do that in IRL. All right, let's go over into our terminal and then fire this up one last time. Cool. Now over on our source side, I'm going to create a new directory. We'll call this one mutations. I'm just sort of making that up as I go along. You can put these anywhere you want. It's fine. Svelte's not going to look at anything GraphQL related, so I wouldn't worry about it. But, having the two different things, two different locations, that's fine. So I'll go and create a new file called add article. And I'll paste in our mutation. So this mutation takes a bunch of parameters. It takes title and content and author, and it passes those on to add article as title, content, and author. And what you get back is slug, title, content, and author. Now, we're not really going to look at that, but whatever, it's fine. All right, so I'm going to save out there. And now I need to go run that generate again to go and build those GraphQL TS bindings. Looks like we checked out, so good. Let me fire up the server. I could do the little Pokemon check, but we know it's going to work. All right, so now I'm going to go over into our articles directory and create a new file called add.svelte. All right, so why does this routing work? Why can we have /article/add and also /articles and then the slug? Well, it's a level of specificity, right? So SvelteKit is going to look to see which essentially is the most specific match, right? If I do /article/add, then it's going to go to the add route. Anything else is basically just going to fall back on that generic route. All right, so let's bring in the client and then also a writable store, which is where we're going to hold the contents of all the fields before we write them off to the server. Let's close up our script tag. And then again, we want to set up our client. We want to bring in our URQL stuff to allow us to do a mutation. So in this case, we bring in mutation instead of query. We bring in add article document because that's the GraphQL code that we want to execute to make the mutation happen. And now we want to go and set up the actual fields. So I'm going to create a writable store. And now let's go create our form. So I'm going to jump down here. Okay, so we got a form tag here. And then within that, we've got a grid with a gap of 5. We're going to use this custom form grid to kind of lay things out and set up the number of columns and the width of each one. And then we got the title and then the input field for that title. So let's bring in the rest of the fields. We've got the content field, which is going to be a text area. And we're going to bind the content value into that one. The same thing with our author field down here. We're going to bind the article author into that one. And that $article comes from our writable store back here. All right, so let's set up that form grid style. That's going to give us 2 columns. One, I guess it's, it's 1/6 of the size, and the other is the 5/6 of the size. So let's do this and see. I'm going to do add in here and see what we got. Looking good. Blah, 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 blah. Great. I mean, we don't know if it's actually working or not, but whatever, that's fine. Okay, so what we really need now is a submit button. So let's go down here and add after the form. an add button, and that's going to need to call handle add. So we need to go and first essentially create the mutation that we're going to go and call when we do that handle add. So to do that, I create a new value called add article. And it's going to have a mutation. It's going to accept these variables, which would be, again, the title, the content, and the author. And then we're going to give it the query to use for the mutation, which is add article document, which comes from our generated code. Cool. And then finally, we just need to do handle add. So the first thing that handle add is going to do is it's going to call add article with the data that we have in that store. And then it's going to set the content and the title to nothing because, we want to have a nice little user interface here. So let's hit save and then go take a look. Hey, looks good. All right. So let's call this my first article. And the author is Jack. Hit add. Cool. And so it's zeroed out the title and the content, so I can add as many as I want. Let's just go back to the home page and see if it's actually done. Nice. There you go. And now I can click on it. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. Very cool. Of course, while all the code is available to you on GitHub, I certainly hope you've enjoyed learning about GraphQL, how it works with Svelte through URQL and GraphQL Code Generator and all that great stuff. If you like this video, of course, hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit the subscribe button and click on that bell and be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder video comes out. And keep those suggestions coming because this video was inspired by one of your suggestions. So keep commenting, keep suggesting. It's great stuff. I love it.